Revenge with Karen. He called me sweetheart right after I finished explaining how a misfiled procurement schedule could trigger a multi-million-dollar breach clause. Said it in front of the entire room, too. Just give me the summary, sweetheart. We don't need a bedtime story. And I smiled. Because I've learned that when a man calls you sweetheart in a conference room, what he really means is I have no idea what I'm doing. Your competence threatens my fragile PowerPoint kingdom. The room went quiet. One of the interns chuckled and immediately choked on it. I went back to my notes. He went back to pretending the supply chain was a self-driving car he could steer with his buzzwords and a Bluetooth headset. Let me be clear, I wasn't inefficient. I was the last sandbag holding back the legal flood no one else knew was coming. For 2 years, I'd massaged a nuclear clause buried on page 37 of a legacy contract with our largest supplier. A clause that said, if our Q2 fulfillment rate ever dropped below 92.5%, they could walk. 5 business days. No notice, no appeals, just poof. And we always danced on the edge of that number. Always. Because corporate loves just-in-time inventory like it's a religion. Because the people upstairs think Excel spreadsheets count as divine protection. They had no idea that clause even existed. I did. I negotiated a quiet side letter with the supplier's VP to hold off enforcement. Temporary, fragile, dependent on my updates and my version of inefficiency, which was really just controlled panic in khaki slacks. That clause was a landmine wrapped in beige font. Every time I sat across from an executive who wanted shorter emails, I just nodded and kept tap dancing around it. Also, real quick, if you've made it this far, you're already smarter than 97% of folks who listen to these stories and don't subscribe or hit like. Go ahead, tap that button. It's free, and it seriously helps our team feel like we're not screaming into a void lined with office carpet tiles and stale K-cups. Back to the mess. He strutted in 3 months ago, freshly plucked from some failed e-commerce startup, smelling like ambition and sandalwood deodorant. Barely 35, VP of Operations, which in our world meant never been in a warehouse, but really good at Slack messages that end with rocket emojis. He started his reign by cutting the morning metrics briefing. Said it was unscalable. I reminded him it was how we caught vendor latency before it snowballed. Asked me to streamline the report. I shaved off a paragraph. He told me to make it a bullet list. I gave him 3 bullets. He said, still too much. Just flag anything urgent. I didn't flag the clause. I'd already warned them about it 2 years ago. Got told, and I quote, let sleeping dogs lie, so I did. But I kept the leash in my drawer, just in case. The real shift came in week 6. He started deleting archived documentation. Whole years of contract logs gone. Legacy clutter, he called it. Then he cut the compliance sync meetings. Too much bureaucracy. Then he reassigned one of my team members to marketing for cross-functional exposure. It was like watching someone unplug your life support and call it meditation. He'd call me into his office and ask for one-pager takeaways. Wanted to turn my full vendor impact briefs into PowerPoint decks with GIFs. GIFs. Once had to explain to him what a rolling forecast was, and he replied, I'm more of a vibes-based operator, so I gave him vibes. I gave him a vibes-only version of our supplier standing, green light, stable, no concerns. I stopped fighting. I stopped warning. I smiled. And every time he called me sweetheart, I reminded myself that one day, he was going to meet the clause. And it wasn't going to call him anything at all. Started calling it the new rhythm. Said we were shedding old skins, becoming leaner, meaner, more agile. Meanwhile, I was watching him surgically amputate every safety net we had like they were tumors, documentation protocols, approval hierarchies, legal reviews. He nuked the historical contract archive from our shared drive in one afternoon. Said, if we need it, legal's got it. Legal didn't have it. I had it. I was it. Every footnote, every comma, every upon mutual agreement that had saved us from 3 lawsuits and 1 vendor mutiny was buried in that drive. Gone. Next came the vendor dashboard rules. Too many filters, he said, sipping his oat milk latte like it contained divine wisdom. Just show me the summary numbers. So the analysts stopped highlighting fluctuations, stopped flagging risk indicators. No one wanted to be the messenger, especially after he publicly mocked Daniel from procurement for overreacting to a 3-day shipping delay that turned into a $120K penalty. I gave him what he asked for, a tidy, weekly summary of supplier relations. No mention of the clause. No reminder that the grace period on our side agreement was expiring in 6 weeks. Just color-coded cells and polite corporate lies. Vendor stability, green. SLA performance, on track. Action items, none. What he didn't realize was that the real action item was my silence. I assumed naively that he'd catch on, that maybe he was stress testing the system before implementing some genius overhaul, that maybe he'd eventually ask why the vendor we relied on for 60% of our packaging was still operating under an informal understanding. But he never asked, just started calling my work administrative fluff and joking about paper pushers in all-hands meetings. I'd sit there, sipping cold coffee and mentally calculating how long it would take for his incompetence to finish the job. 3 months max, maybe 2 if the warehouse saw another backlog. When I realized the iceberg was unavoidable, I started documenting everything. I opened a private Google Drive under my personal Gmail, copied redlined versions of every relevant contract, backed up my change logs, took screenshots of Slack threads where I gently tried to raise concerns and got ghosted in real time. Every time I hit download, it felt like closing a coffin lid on a part of the company nobody even knew was dying. My favorite entry was a Slack message he sent to finance. We don't need legacy thinkers slowing us down. If they can't keep up, we trim the fat. Irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the last 2 years being the connective tissue between legacy knowledge and present stability. I was the lean system, just not the kind you could chart on a dashboard or slap a buzzword on. I stopped sleeping through the night around this time, started keeping a notepad on my nightstand. Would wake up at 2 a.m. with another "oh God," he deleted that 2 moment and scribbled down file names to archive. My dread had taken on a rhythm. Not panic, not even anxiety, just this slow drip resignation that we were heading for a cliff, and my job was now to chronicle the moments before the fall. Like the black box in a plane going down, except no one was listening to the cockpit. Every week, I'd sit across from him in our one-on-one and hand over a summary that was more metaphor than memo. He never questioned a thing. He'd say, "Thanks, sweetheart," smile like he just solved world hunger. And I'd smile back with teeth, because I knew exactly when the supply chain was going to bite him in the ass. It was a Tuesday, the kind that smelled like burned coffee and blind optimism. We were prepping for the quarterly vendor performance review, and he decided to invite the CEO to see how operations is evolving. I asked if he wanted the full supply breakdown, especially since our numbers had dipped below the 93% fulfillment mark for the first time in 2 years. He waved me off with one hand while scrolling his phone with the other. "Just give me the summary," he said without looking up. I paused, really paused. Not for drama, but because my throat had gone dry with all the things I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, calmly, "There's a clause in the legacy contract with Weston Packaging, our largest supplier, that technically allows them to terminate with 5 business days' notice if our Q2 fulfillment rate drops below." He finally looked up. Smirked. "Summary, sweetheart. If there's a problem, legal would have flagged it. Legal didn't know because I never filed it as a problem. I filed it as handled, because for 2 years it was handled. Quietly. Off book. Balanced like a spinning plate on my fingertip." Flashback to a meeting in late 2021. Weston Packaging's VP of Logistics had called me directly. We dipped under the threshold that quarter by 0.3% thanks to a customs delay nobody saw coming. Their legal team wanted to invoke the clause. Walk. I talked them down. Said we were realigning KPIs, brought in a financial performance buffer, promised stricter vendor QA on our end. But most importantly, I drafted a side letter, nothing official. Just a handshake memo that said, "We won't enforce the clause as long as quarterly fulfillment remains above 90% and you maintain dedicated rep continuity." It was supposed to be temporary, 3 quarters, long enough for anyone else, to renegotiate the actual contract. But nobody did, because I made it go away, because I kept it tidy. Because every time a quarter threatened the number, I shuffled vendor invoices, rerouted deliveries, and massaged Excel into compliance. That letter expires in 11 days. He never read it, never renewed it, doesn't even know it exists. That meeting, he interrupted me 3 more times. At one point, he said, "We've got bigger fish to fry than dusty old contracts." This is a growth year. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was over. I could see it. The ticking clock. fuse already burning under his chair, while he talked about scalability and vendor synergy like he was auditioning for a cereal commercial. After the meeting, I printed a copy of the side letter and slid it into a manila envelope labeled when, not if. I stuck it at the bottom of my desk drawer next to a stress ball shaped like a brain and a mint tin I hadn't refilled in years. I stopped trying after that. No more gentle nudges, no more questions framed as jokes. I gave him the summaries he wanted, each one a little cleaner, a little less urgent, until they read like horoscopes, vague, comforting, and absolutely useless. I knew what was coming. He was going to slam into that clause like a deer through a windshield, glass and fur and shock everywhere, and I'd already tried to swerve the wheel. Now I was just gripping the armrest, waiting for the crash. The meeting invite never came. It was the first real sign I'd been quietly amputated. Weston Packaging, the same supplier with the clause no one else seemed to know existed, was scheduled for a quarterly sync, and I'd always been point on those. Always. I built the agenda. I ran the call. I handled the postmortem and the delicate contract language follow-ups that made sure no one got itchy with termination rights. But this time, nothing. I found out about the call because I overheard Tyler, junior analyst I'd mentored for 3 years, mention it on a coffee run. Vendor call with Weston at 2, he said to someone. New format, streamlined, streamlined. That word had started to feel like a knife slipped under the ribcage. I opened my calendar blank, checked the call sheet locked, tried accessing the vendor dashboard, error 403. Access denied. I didn't make a scene, didn't fire off an angry email. I just stood there for a full minute, mouse hovering over the screen, and let the chill settle. Later that day, my manager, well, my former manager now, I suppose, called me into a huddle room and handed me a restructuring chart printed on glossy stock like it was an invitation to a wedding I'd never agreed to attend. Your team is being realigned under strategic vendor insights, she said like the words meant anything. I blinked. Under whom? She smiled the way people do when they're trying not to say you're being replaced by someone who plays ping pong with the VP. Devin, he's bringing fresh perspective. You'll still be involved, advisory capacity. Devin, a kid who once asked if a force majeure clause was something from Star Wars. That Devin. I nodded, stood, and left without saying another word. 2 hours later, I couldn't access my own folder structure. Decade-old contract notes? Gone. My KPI trend macros? Gone. The cross-index tracker I built from scratch during COVID to triage vendor risk by heat score and geography? Gone. All deleted or archived for simplification. That's what the Slack message said when I asked. I got a private message that night from Priya, one of the senior analysts I'd trained up from an intern. He said you were too old school, that the future of ops is automation and decision clarity. I'm sorry. This sucks. I stared at the message for a long time. Didn't reply. Not because I was angry at her, but because she wasn't wrong. He did think I was too old school. He'd said as much in passing, smirking over his shoulder like I was a dusty encyclopedia in a Kindle world. What he didn't know was that old school had saved this company's ass more times than he'd remembered to mute himself on Zoom. I stayed 2 more weeks in that ghost role. Sat in my same chair, walked the same path to the office microwave. But I was invisible. Devin started calling my old team his analysts. They stopped CCing me on vendor updates. I became the skeleton in the ops closet, too experienced to fire outright, too inconvenient to keep visible. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. That's the thing about people like me. We don't scream, we document. And while they were busy playing transformational leadership dress-up, I was quietly gathering my receipts, my notes, my emails, my backups. I even took a photo of the restructuring chart and annotated it in red pen like a crime scene map. Because I knew something they didn't. The bomb was still ticking, and I was the only one who knew where it was buried. He didn't even shut the door all the way. Just waved me in like I was the catering delivery. Grab a seat, he said, leaning back in his ergonomic throne, legs crossed like he was about to conduct a TED talk on synergy. The room smelled like citrus sanitizer and smugness. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, waited. I already knew what was coming, the way you know when a glass is about to fall but you're too tired to catch it. He glanced at a sheet of paper on the desk. Didn't bother flipping it around. We're trimming inefficiencies, he said, lips curling up like he was proud of the phrasing. Nothing personal, just realigning resources for growth. I looked at him, perfectly still. He cleared his throat. You've been here a while, done some great work, but your methods are legacy. And frankly, the duplication of effort between your documentation processes and what Devon's team is streamlining, it's just not scalable. I watched his mouth move like a puppet's and wondered if he even believed the words, or if this was just theater. Either way, it didn't matter. "Thank you," I said. No tremble, no smile, just that. He blinked. "Sorry," I said. "Thank you for the clarity." I stood. Took one last look at the glass walls of the conference room, the corridor beyond filled with half-smirking junior staff and a dying plant someone forgot to water last fiscal year. He stood too, probably expecting some kind of scene. An outburst. A tearful protest. Maybe even a quiet threat. But I gave him none of it. No fight. No warning. No "you'll regret this." Just a calm nod. Then I walked out. The purse on my shoulder felt heavier than usual. Inside it, a sleek black flash drive with every critical document, every redline revision, every backup version of the Weston contract, including that little side letter he never knew existed. Time-stamped. Encrypted. Silent. My insurance policy. I didn't pack a box. Didn't ask to say goodbye. Just handed my badge to the front desk on the way out and walked into the sunlight like I'd been released from a cult. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 5 minutes and stared at the steering wheel. Let the engine idle. Felt something shift deep in my chest, not sadness, not fear. Just relief. Relief that I didn't have to keep shielding idiots anymore. That I was no longer the human firewall between their arrogance and the company's slow collapse. My phone buzzed. Calendar alert I hadn't disabled yet. Reminder. Renew Weston letter of agreement. Expires in 6 days. I laughed. Just once. A short, flat sound that didn't make it past the windshield. Then I drove away, leaving behind a boardroom full of people who thought efficiency was about speed and had no clue how much of their stability had come from someone willing to take the long, hard, quiet way around disaster. The first week felt like silence had mass, like it pressed against my ears when I made coffee, like it followed me through the grocery store, humming beneath fluorescent lights. I slept better, dreamless and flat, but every morning I still half-reached for my work phone before remembering I dropped it in the office suggestion box on my way out. Nobody called. Nobody emailed. At least, not until day 12. That's when I saw the name pop up, Tyler, junior analyst who used to triple-check every bullet point on his vendor reports like they were SAT essays. He'd always been thorough, always cautious, always afraid of screwing up in front of me. Now he was on his own. Missed call, then another. Then a message, "Hey, do you remember what fulfillment threshold Weston considers non-compliant? It's not in the new dashboard. Can't find it in the shared docs either." I stared at the screen. Didn't answer. By then, I'd already blocked the rest of the company. Every Slack handle, every email alias. Even Devon, who'd sent me some guilt-laced LinkedIn message about wanting to reconnect and learn from my process. Cute. The truth was, I'd already seen the benchmark get missed. It was on Weston's client portal, public-facing if you knew where to dig. Fulfillment had dipped to 91.2%. Just low enough. Just late enough. I sat in my garden with a mug of green tea, watching my dog chase shadows while the leaves browned early this year. October crept in cold and fast. I didn't smile when I saw the number. But I didn't flinch either. It had always been a game of inches, and I'd held the line as long as I could. But now they were alone, sprinting blindfolded through a field I'd spent years mapping for landmines. They missed the benchmark. Exactly when I knew they would. Exactly when I warned they might. The timing wasn't even poetic, it was mathematical. Weston's clause didn't care about ignorance. It didn't care about titles or LinkedIn endorsements or who had the best Slack emojis. It just existed. Cold, legal, lethal. I imagined the moment when someone, probably Priya, realized what had happened. I pictured the quiet panic of scrolling through archives that no longer existed, realizing the one person who used to say, "Don't worry, I've got it handled," actually had been handling it. It felt like watching a house burn that you'd already moved out of. You'd warned them about the wiring. You'd pointed at the faulty breaker, and they laughed, called you old school, told you to get with the future. And now the roof was gone and they were still inside, trying to use a spreadsheet as a fire extinguisher. There was satisfaction, yes, but also sadness. I hadn't wanted it to fall apart, not really. I'd spent years patching holes with duct tape and patience, not because I loved the company, but because someone had to. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd wise up. They didn't. And now they'd learn the way fools always learn, not through guidance, not through grace, but through the pain of impact. I took another sip of tea and deleted Tyler's message. The bomb hadn't gone off yet. I could feel the tremor building under my feet. The clause detonated on a Thursday. Weston Packaging sent a cold, clean email to ops at 9:03 a.m. Subject line, Notice of Termination per Section 8.2b. No apologies, no explanations. Just 5 business days' notice as permitted. And just like that, 60% of the company's packaging supply evaporated. Pallets were mid-transit. Orders were live in the system. Warehouses were prepped for shipments that now had no boxes, no liners, no tape. An entire month's logistics plan collapsed in real time, like a folding chair kicked out from under a tightrope walker. The VP, bless him, still didn't understand what had happened. Not really. He stood in front of the company's internal all-hands meeting with a strained smile and said, "We're experiencing some unexpected vendor behavior. We're activating contingency plans and remain committed to operational excellence." Operational excellence. From the guy who deleted half the documentation and laughed when someone brought up backup suppliers. The contingency plan turned out to be panic. Finance went into a tailspin, trying to model the impact. By noon, they'd projected a $42 million hit to Q3 revenue. By Friday, it had ballooned to $63 million, factoring in penalties, lost contracts, and delay fines from downstream clients. The CEO canceled her travel and called an emergency leadership summit. Board members started using words like material breach and shareholder exposure. Someone from PR suggested they frame the incident as a disruption event due to global instability, which is the corporate equivalent of saying your dog ate the economy. Meanwhile, legal was drowning. They couldn't find the clause. Found the contract, sure, but not the annotated version, not the red line trail, not the side letter, not the informal memos I'd been slipping into vendor comms for 2 years like blood pressure meds hidden in applesauce. They found a reference to Section 8.2b and flagged it as ambiguous, which was hilarious, because I'd written a 12-page internal guide once titled 8.2b, the nuclear clause nobody talks about, had been deleted during streamlining. Nobody could answer the real questions. Who negotiated this clause? Who was managing compliance against it? Why weren't the dashboards flagging the breach? Because the answers were all the same. Me, because you unplugged the dashboards, Brad. The VP gave a second press statement the next day, this time to an industry outlet, calling Weston's move sudden and without precedent. Which was funny, considering I'd flagged the clause in 4 separate reports between 2021 and 2023. But none of that mattered now. The supplier had walked. No one could stop it. All they could do was scramble, like toddlers trying to duct tape together a shattered vase before Mom came home. And while they were doing that, I was at the farmer's market, buying tomatoes and honey, listening to someone's acoustic cover of Fleetwood Mac playing over the speakers. Collapse doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes it comes with a polite email and a clock that starts counting down. 5 business days. They found the email chain on day 4. Buried in an old legal inbox that hadn't been migrated during the modernization sweep, someone in compliance stumbled across a thread dated March 18, 2023. Subject line, Urgent, Clause 8.2b Risk Mitigation Strategy attached. It was me. Writing, calmly and thoroughly, to flag the exact benchmark that Weston had just used to pull the plug. The email was polite, concise, annotated. It included a draft of the side letter I'd brokered, an escalation matrix, and a list of conditions required to avoid triggering the clause. I had even bolded the expiration date, October 14, 2025. That email should have been archived, actioned, used as a foundation for renegotiation. Instead, it had been marked as low priority by some bright-eyed analyst who thought the future was digital dashboards and real-time vendor sentiment metrics. Legal escalated immediately. They began digging through the backup servers, the ones not purged when the VP launched his great streamline purge. It was a forensic recovery effort, and what they unearthed wasn't just a clause, it was a narrative. My change logs, my redlined contracts, manual timestamped adjustments to delivery incentives, SLA padding, clause references. Internal memos I'd written with contingencies if Q2 performance dropped below the line. Everything. I had left breadcrumbs, not for revenge, not for legacy, for survival. Because deep down, I'd known that the people in charge wouldn't recognize a tripwire until it had already snapped their legs out from under them. And now the CEO saw it all at once. In a briefing that took place behind closed boardroom doors, the head of legal laid it out in simple terms. She was the patch. We didn't even know the pipe was leaking. The room went still. Then the questions began, hard ones, directed squarely at the VP, who suddenly wasn't so smug. Why wasn't this clause flagged on your risk map? Who instructed the deletion of her dashboard tools? Did you ever review the full Weston contract? He stammered, sweated, reached for a water bottle that wasn't there. I reviewed the key terms. I assumed legal. No, someone interrupted. Did you personally read the contract? Silence. He looked down, hands fidgeting with the edge of his blazer like maybe there was an escape hatch sewn into the lining. A few board members shook their heads, quiet and disgusted. One of them finally said what everyone else was thinking. You fired the person holding this whole thing together because she didn't fit your rebrand. Congratulations. He didn't respond. Couldn't. And that's when the dominoes really began to fall. Not with panic, not with shouting, just slow, inevitable collapse. Because now they knew. It wasn't an unexpected disruption. It wasn't a black swan event. It was negligence dressed in buzzwords. Ego wrapped in efficiency. Hadn't modernized the system. They'd stripped the armor off the engine and called it innovation. And I'd been the armor. The email chain, the side letter, the change logs, they told the full story. They were the receipts, and they'd just been read aloud at his funeral. The first call came in on a Monday, around 10:14 a.m., just as I was trimming basil in the backyard. I let it go to voicemail. Second one came that afternoon. Different board member. I recognized the name, remembered her once nodding absently while the VP explained that redundancy is where innovation goes to die. I silenced the call and went back to watering the tomatoes. The third call came Tuesday. No message, just a missed call and a follow-up email with the subject line, time sensitive, request for consultation. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said. So on Wednesday, I walked down to the post office, handed over a slim, padded envelope, and paid extra for tracking and signature confirmation. Inside was a flash drive. It contained a pristine, cleanly indexed version of the Weston contract. Red lines restored, side letter included, my original annotations dated and initialed, change logs, and one final document, a PDF titled Operating with Eyes Closed, a summary of risk management failures, 2022-2025. On top of the drive was a yellow sticky note, scrawled in black ink. This is the full version. You kept asking for the summary. I heard later from a friend in finance that the VP was fired within 24 hours of the board receiving the drive. No meeting, no transition statement, no all-staff farewell Slack message filled with empty praise and vague promises of his next chapter. Just gone. A name removed from the directory. A title reassigned to interim. His calendar wiped like he never existed. Apparently he tried to blame legal, then finance, then Weston. In the end, he had no one left to point at but himself, and I didn't watch it unfold. Didn't read the think pieces or lurk on company forums or check if anyone finally understood the cost of mistaking quiet competence for inefficiency. I just brewed a cup of tea, chamomile with honey, sat in the garden, watched my dog chase a bird he had absolutely no hope of catching. The sun was warm. The wind smelled like wet soil and vindication. My phone buzzed once on the patio table. LinkedIn, CEO name has endorsed you for strategic risk mitigation. I stared at the screen for a long second, then closed the app and turned my phone face down. Some messages don't need replies. Some victories don't need applause. Just silence, peace, and the sweet, quiet knowledge that the next time someone says, just give me the summary, I won't. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.